Chancy and the Grand Rascal by Sid Fleischman. 9. Chancy's Axe. The flock of chicks was outgrowing the kindling box. They scratched and fluttered over the logs, and Chancy tended them like a shepherd. He fed them corn grits out of his hand and dug worms on the banks at night. Calamity rode his shoulder like a young falcon. From dusk to dawn, Uncle Will and the raftsmen strode against the sweet oars. Colonel Plug sat filling tub after tub with peeled potatoes and mumbling to himself like a fallen emperor. Chancy wasted hardly a thought on him. Louisville and the Falls of Ohio were approaching, and he became aware of an air of expectancy aboard the raft. The skiff, the stove, and the raft tools were lashed down. Billy Arkansas checked the tie logs to make sure the raft would hold together. Captain Harp kept squinting at the river and shaking his head. "Only a blessed fool would run the falls this time of year," he declared. "Gents, I reckon I'm a fool. If the river drops any lower, we'll be raising dust with our oars. But we're taking the falls. Never mind, Louisville. We ain't stopping. I tell you, we'll wish we had another foot of water when we hit the chute. We'll be lucky if we don't pile up like matchsticks." He gave a snort and a laugh. "Now rest easy, boys. You'll be busier than a fiddler's elbow in another couple hours." Chancy was keen to go adventuring down the Ohio, but he wondered if it might be a better idea to walk the rest of the way to Paducah. Plunging over a waterfall on 3 strings of hickory logs didn't strike him as altogether judicious. He shot Uncle Will a glance, but Uncle Will continued whistling pleasantly at his work. The raft drifted along with the current, the 6 long oars twitching like cat's whiskers. The river widened, and Louisville rose out of the bare grass like a bend on the Kentucky bank. There were so many buildings that Chancy couldn't begin to count them. He could see horses and buggies everywhere along the streets. At the landing, great white steamboats clustered like suckling pigs. Chancy longed to go ashore and see the great sights, but Captain Harp hardly gave the city a second glance. The Falls of Ohio lay ahead. A river ferry bore down on them, its whistle screaming. Captain Harp ignored it. Before long, Chancy could see white water ahead. He herded the flock of chicks into the kindling box and lashed his blanket over the top. The knotholes would let in air. Then he found a safe place for his axe and tied down the wheelbarrow. "Hard over, boys," shouted Captain Harp. "There's deeper water on the Indiana side." Moments later, the raft went bucking and heaving over broken water. Spray shot into the summer day and lit up like swarms of fireflies. Chancy stretched himself along a tie log and held on like a barnacle. The raft shuddered and stretched and groaned. The men bent their backs against the long sweep, steering as best they could through the rapids. Chancy's teeth were almost jarred loose. He clenched his jaws and turned his head. He could see the chicks bouncing away under the blanket, but the thought of the falls ahead took his breath away. Suddenly the raft went slipping down a long chute where the water raced in shallow glassy sheets over broad limestone shelves. The oarsmen stayed on their feet, fighting the swift current and clinging with their curled toes. They were already wet as water snakes. At every moment, Chancy expected to see Uncle Will flung into the air. Captain Harp worked his arms like pump handles and shouted above the roar of the water. The chute seemed miles long to Chancy, and they hadn't even arrived at the falls yet. From moment to moment, the logs scraped rock. "Spit, boys, spit!" Captain Harp barked. "We need all the water we can get." Suddenly, Uncle Will and the forward logs drove out of sight. Chancy hardly had time to gasp. The rest of the raft went plunging after them, as if they had slid off the edge of the earth. But it was only a shallow dam, and the logs leveled out in smooth water. Still, Chancy held on. His knuckles were white as bone. The side of his face was scraped raw. This could only be the calm before the storm, and he waited. But soon Captain Harper was towering over him. "Asleep, boy?" "No, sir," Chancy said. "How much farther to those infernal falls?" Captain Harp's eyes popped. Hope I haven't been saying Harper this whole time. Hoo-la! Wasn't that ride woolly enough to suit you? You just came over the falls, sonny. 3 miles of them. Chancy lifted his head and looked back. He sat up. If he'd known that was the Falls of Ohio, he would have enjoyed it twice as much. Captain Hart burst into a laugh. "You want to turn back and ride him again?" Chancy brushed himself off. "I don't mind, sir," he said, "if it wouldn't be too much trouble." It was the laziest time of Chancy's life. Outside of tending the chicks, he occupied himself watching the river unwind. Day by day, the bluffs gave way to woodlands and flats. The horizon stretched further and further away. Endless flights of passenger pigeons crossed the river in fluttering blue streamers. Hour after hour, the summer sun beat down, and occasionally a thunder shower would arrive like an act of mercy. Each small river town was an event, and he'd gaze at the cobbled landings and boat stores and changing ferries. He might grow up to be a coming and going man like Uncle Will, free as the wind, with no end of things to do and new sights to see. But at night, Uncle Will talked more and more of giving up his ways and finding a place to roost. A family like us, once we round up Indiana and Mirandy and little Jamie, why, we can't be coming and going all the while. It's time I made something of myself. I'd like you young'uns to be proud of me. I'm proud of you as you stand, Uncle Will, Chancy said earnestly. By the eternal, there's no telling where a man like me could end up. Governor of you, and I tell you, Chancy, I feel a stirring of ambition. I hear a singing in my ears like meadowlarks on a spring morning. A family man ought to amount to something. Then Uncle Will wound his clocks and went to sleep. They were a long way from settling down, Chancy told himself. They hadn't as much as found Indiana yet, and he might be grown before they turned up. And he might be grown before they turned up Mirandy and little Jamie. In the days that followed, Chancy was hard put to find enough feed for the chicks. They wanted to eat all the time and had grown as fat as pigeons. He dipped a stick in molasses and caught water bugs and grasshoppers and other insects on the wing. He let them peck for grit in the dirt early in the morning and eat fresh grass off the banks. They needed full crops to digest their food, and he assured himself their crops were forming by feeling the hard lumps low in their necks. Their combs were growing out yellow as corn between their eyes. In the hottest part of the day, he'd sit in the shade of the doghouse and let Calamity peck at his shirt buttons or at his teeth. He'd say, "Fan me," and sometimes Calamity would. Then Chancy would offer a grasshopper or a water bug as a reward. It was astonishing what a fine breeze Calamity's rust-red wings could beat up. "I'll be surprised if we're not in Paducah by Thursday," Captain Harp said. 3 days. Chancy almost began to count the hours. They tied up that night along a Kentucky canebrake and awoke the next morning to find that Colonel Plug had departed in the night. "That man was harder to get rid of than a wart," Captain Harp laughed. "Boys, cast off." The oarsmen went to their sweeps, and the raft worked its way into the current. But within a minute or two, Billy Arkansas discovered that his squirrel gun was missing. Captain Harp found that his Sunday suit had disappeared, with his money pouch in the pocket. And with horror, Chancy saw that his 4-pound axe was gone. A bolt of lightning couldn't have stunned him more. He stared at the wheelbarrow. It couldn't be true, but it was. His pa's axe was missing. Uncle Will bristled. "That ornery low-down blackleg. He must have teethed on brimstone." "I'll snatch him bald-headed," Captain Harp declared, pulling his hat furiously down over his ears. "I'll skin him with my living hands." Billy Arkansas was so hopping mad, he looked set to leap the river and start tearing up the cane patch. "Head her in, Captain. I'm going ashore." Captain Harp ordered the raft back to the bank, and for an hour the raftsmen went crashing through the sorghum. They didn't turn up so much as a footprint. Finally, Captain Harp called them back to the raft. He was breathing live steam. "Boys, that skunk is long gone. If we go flea jumping around the countryside, we'll get stuck in the dust all summer with 3 strings of logs. Look at the river. It's already lower than a snake's belly. It pains me to say it, boys, but we've got to move where there's still moisture under us." Chancy's eyes flashed to Uncle Will. "I am to stay," he declared flatly. "Uncle Will, I intend to get my pa's axe back." "We'll stay, both of us," Uncle Will nodded, and he turned to the raft pilot. "If we can't outrun the double-jawed, chicken-livered, tallow-faced varmint, by the eternal, we'll outcalculate him." Captain Harp bit off a large chaw of tobacco and handed it around. "He's took to the woods like a bear to a honey tree, and he'll stay hid. That's why he took along Billy's squirrel gun and Chancy's axe." "That's what he wanted us to believe, but that's not the way I calculate it," said Uncle Will, his cat's eyes set at a keen squint. "A humbug like Colonel Plug won't head for the woods. Not if there was cash money in your pouch. More'n $60, the thieving low-hound reprobate. Why, if he ever crosses my path again, I'll give him such a high kick he won't come down for several generations. I know exactly where we will find him, said Will Buckthorn. Captain Harp lifted the hat off his ears. Exactly, did you say? Precisely, said Uncle Will. A man like Colonel Plug, always putting on airs, just calculate the human nature of it. With $60 in the pocket of your Sunday suit, why, he'll make for the best hotel and buy himself the best room, and that's where we'll find him. The darkness lifted from Captain Harp's face. Hoo-la! He laughed, and then the shadows returned. But confound and doggone it, which way did he go? Either upriver or down, said Uncle Will, the soul of confidence as usual. You're floating downriver. Just have a look at the towns along the way. Chancy and I will march upriver as far back as Shawneetown and Uniontown. He can't have got any further than that. If you don't find him, most likely asleep in some hotel, by ginger, we will. Boys, said Captain Harp, what are we standing here for? The crew leaped along the logs to sweep oars. Chancy and Uncle Will left their belongings aboard so as to travel light. But Chancy snatched up Calamity. That bird would be forlorn without him. He stood with Uncle Will in the canebrake and watched the raft drift away. We'll meet you in Paducah, Uncle Will shouted. And that is the end of Chapter 9.